We're talking college sports in the Deep South where college football is king. And we tend to want to believe that the SEC conference is the best conference in college football. The SEC West is the best sub-conference in football. And the battle cry is War Eagle. Want to give a shout out to my fearless and true gang. Let's get this comment section really active. And also to look at some of my past videos, click on playlists and there's some categorized playlists that you can reflect back on some videos that I've done in the past. I've done quite a number, so sometimes it might be pretty hard to sift through all of that stuff. All right, so as we go into the 2019 season, Gus Malzahn coming into the season with, I would say, a pretty reasonable amount of pressure to have a successful year for the Auburn Tigers, and rightfully so, considering the disappointment of 8-5. Also sandwiched in with the disappointing ending in 2017, seconds away from winning the national championship in 2013, and a complete fall apart in 2015. You know, Gus Malzahn is definitely at least on some level of the hot seat. All right, so when we look at this, we want to be reasonable, though. You know, coming into the 2019 season, Auburn will probably have one of the tougher schedules in the country, starting the season off with Oregon, obviously having to face some of the higher tier teams in the SEC, and capping it off with games against Georgia and Alabama. Fortunately, those two games will be at Jordan-Hare Stadium this year. So when we think about this whole Gus Malzahn thing and how he should approach the season, I just think it's just like with anything else. You know, in the SEC, the coaches are always on the hot seat. Nick Saban is on the hot seat. Kirby Smart, all those coaches. You have to understand there's always the pressure to win. There's always pressure to outdo your rival. You have the pressures of the fan base who carry the outcomes of the teams on their sleeves as if they're playing themselves. So there's always that added pressure. And then with the advent of social media, constant information about how fans feel about the coaching staffs, and you know, you have your quote unquote expert analysis. All of those things add to the anxiety to want to consistently be successful in the SEC. One of the things that is going to go in Gus Malzahn's favor this year is the fact that he has three guys who have direct ties and direct game experience in the SEC as football coaches, that being Travis Williams, Cody Burns, and Carnell Williams. All of those guys have been on undefeated Auburn teams. Cody Burns, which was on the national championship team, so they can give that frame of reference to the players to kind of get some pressure off of Gus Malzahn. Number two, one thing Gus Malzahn definitely has to do in this season is he has to win the games that are in hand. The inexplicable losses, the unnecessary losses is really what has him on Auburn's hot seat anyway. Losing games like being up 20 points to LSU and then turning around and losing that game. Again in 2018, similar situation. You know, surrendering a loss to one of the worst teams in the SEC on last season in Tennessee, 30-24. That was just an unnecessary loss. Lack of offensive execution against Mississippi State. Those types of things are going to be inexplicable, especially for a coach that has been in the SEC for over 5 years, okay? And you've seen enough, you've experienced enough, you've gone through a couple of recruiting classes. So now it's time to definitely deliver, especially considering what you got coming back. You know, you got Derrick Brown, who has decided to come back. He could have been drafted probably late in the first round, early second. You know, when you look at that, you know, you also have a plethora of running backs, great skill position players on both sides of the football field, athletic defensive line, athletic linebackers. You have all the tools in place to make a run at this thing, not necessarily saying a national championship, because in the SEC, you just can't promise that. You just never know how the chips are going to fall. But Gus Malzahn has to come into this season with a reasonable amount of urgency. Not anxiety, because when you see him on the sideline, especially when the game starts to get real shaky, he starts putting his clipboard over his face and starts looking real worried, things like that. He's got to have the help of his coaching staff to keep the anxiety down, because I know there's a tremendous amount of pressure. I honestly think Gus Malzahn has, you know, a developed a somewhat of a passion for Auburn. I think that he has more of that than he had before, because you got to consider he's from Arkansas, has a lot of ties to Arkansas, passionate about, Arkansas, the state of Arkansas. That's where he, kind of was born and bred as far as a football coach, being a high school coach for most of that time, then taking on the offensive coordinator at Arkansas, having the great Darren McFadden at running back under his watch. So when you look at those things, I think it just took him some time to really develop a passion and a concern for the Auburn fan base, to understand that games like LSU, Florida, Georgia, all of the SEC games are very important. And you can't just casually lose those games and then, perform on a press conference and say, hey, man, my bad, we had our chances. These fan bases don't want to hear that stuff. They want you to be mad about it, just as mad as they are about it. So when you get on there and you just casually say, oh, well, we'll get them next time, that's just not going to work for typical SEC fan base. So when you look at that, also having reasonable game plans, especially early in the season against Oregon, you just can't have a repeat of Clemson in 2016. You literally gave yourself no chance to win that ball game with the game plan that was in place, especially looking at a situation where you had all quarterbacks were in on one play at one time. You didn't give yourself a chance to create any kind of reasonable rhythm. Your defense played high level, giving you a chance late in the game to possibly win. And you just have to come in with a reasonable game plan. I know Oregon is going to be definitely a high consequence game, but give yourself a chance to win by finding reasonable plays, finding a reasonable strategy to create some rhythm. Don't allow the fact that you're going through a quarterback battle to allow you to make a bad decision that causes you to lose an unnecessary game. That's what is going to get Gus Malzahn and keep him in place as Auburn's head coach. I don't think, it's reasonable as a goal for Auburn to win the national championship. I just don't see that. But what I do see is you have to put yourself, the fan base, the university, the athletic director, and recruits coming in need to see that there is a reasonable effort in the approach to ball games. Reasonable, logical, understandable, because losses are going to happen, especially in the SEC. But when they're just unreasonable to where you didn't even give yourself a chance, especially given your personnel, like the UCF game in, the Peach Bowl. Just didn't give yourself a chance. You're still trying to run your offense based on a healthy Kerryon Johnson, and it's just not reasonable, okay? So those are some of the things that Gus Malzahn has to work on going into this season in order to be successful. Coach with a reasonable level of urgency, not anxiety, a reasonable level of urgency. Let me know how you all feel about this video in the comment section. Once again, it's K-Stu the GOAT. Go ahead and subscribe to the channel. This thing is growing pretty soon. We want to get the super chats going. Once again, War Eagle.